Hello everyone, this is Dr. Nisha Nujumudeen. The topic of discussion for the day is the types of inflation. All those who have missed the previous concept from 1 to 19, make sure that you go through the playlist of this particular video. Having said that, let's quickly have a look into what are the different types of inflation. So now there are two types of inflation, which means they are broadly classified based on speed and based on reasons or causes. So now based on speed means the rate at which they keep on increasing. So based on speed, the different types of inflation are as follows. The first one is creeping inflation, followed by chronic, then you have walking, running, galloping or jumping and hyperinflation. For example, when a baby is born, initially the baby cannot jump, run and all, right? It will creep, crawl, then slowly and gradually walk, run, jump and become so active like you people. Having said that, in inflation, the same procedure is followed. That is, but in terms of numbers. Now, what is creeping inflation? When the price rises up to 3% or when the rate of rise in prices or inflation is between 2 to 3% per annum. Per annum means what? Every year. Then such a kind of price rise is called as what? Creeping inflation in simple terms. That is up to 3%. The price rise can happen. But the range is what? 2 to 3%. Then such a kind of inflation comes to be called as creeping inflation. And now this creeping inflation is also called as what? It is called as low inflation or mild inflation, because slowly and gradually we can see the price rise and the limit is what? Up to 3% per annum, not more than that, which means up to 2.99%. If there is inflation, then it comes under a category or a type called as what? Creeping inflation. This creeping inflation is also called as manageable inflation. Why? Because when there is creeping inflation, the traders and the businessmen, they find it quite reasonable because they are able to earn profits. And now because of that, they are interested to invest more. So it is a kind of manageable situation. That is why creeping inflation is mostly preferred. Now that's all. Having said that, the next type of inflation is called as chronic. Chronic means what? Long term. So now I am telling you in a chronological way. In many textbooks, they will not even give you what is walking inflation. They'll give you creeping, running and galloping. That's it. The chronology will not be followed. But we will study in a very sequential manner. Okay. So now, if this creeping inflation is continuing for a long period of time, then that is called as what? Chronic inflation. If the rate of rise in prices or inflation keeps on slowly and gradually increasing for a longer period of time, then creeping inflation turns out to be what? Long-term or chronic inflation in simple terms. Now, the next one is what? Walking inflation. Now, when the rate of inflation, let's say for example, when price increases or when the rise in price is more than 3%, but up to 10% per annum. So more than 3, but what is the limit? Up to 10% per annum. It is called as walking inflation in simple term. Price rise up to 9.99% is allowed where in walking inflation. Now, this walking inflation is very, very serious. Why? Because if proper precautionary measures are not taken under the walking inflation category, then what happens? Then automatically serious repercussions can happen for the economy, because walking inflation is what? Single digit inflation. You can see the price range is what? 3 to 10%, which means up to 9.99% is allowed, but not 10. You understand? So now if you don't control inflation at this level, then walking inflation can give rise to something called as running inflation, which is none other than double-digit inflation, which is very, very dangerous. So now, the next is what? Running inflation. When walking inflation is not taken seriously, automatically what happens? Prices keep on increasing. leading to something called as double-digit inflation or what? Or running inflation. So now running inflation is like when the rate of rise in prices is more than 10%, but up to 20% per annum. Then such kind of inflation is called as what, students? It is called as running inflation. And this running inflation is actually dangerous because it is two-digit inflation. And this running inflation is also called as trotting inflation. Another term is trotting inflation. Now, if running inflation is not taken into consideration, then it becomes very, very dangerous because at the stage of running inflation, a rapid increase or a rapid acceleration in the rate of price is visible. If that is not controlled, again, it gives rise to another type of inflation called as what? Galloping or jumping inflation. So basically, a horse gallops or jumps very faster, right? Similarly, galloping or jumping or hopping inflation. That is another term. Take care. So now, this particular inflation means when the rise in prices or when the rate of rise in inflation is more than 20%. Because running inflation is what? Running inflation is 10 to 20% per annum. The next is what? Galloping inflation or jumping or hopping inflation. So now when the rate of rise in inflation is more than 20%, up to 1000%. So this can come up to 1000%, which means up to 999% per annum. Then that is called as what? That is called as hopping or jumping or galloping inflation. And here you can see up to 1000 means, for example, when the rate of rise in prices is 50%, 100%, 300% or 600% or 800% up to 999%, which is up to what? 1000%. It is called as galloping or jumping inflation. It is called as triple-digit inflation because 200, 300 is coming up, right? And this is indeed even more serious because when you are not able to control inflation at this level, then inflation becomes uncontrollable. And from galloping, the next type of inflation is hyperinflation. We will discuss in detail about hyperinflation in the next video because it is exclusively a very important topic of discussion for the prelims as well. Yes? In simple terms, hyper means what? Uncontrollable or extreme form of inflation. When the rate of rise in prices is more than 1000% per annum. For example, when price rise is more than 50% in a month. In a month, more than 50 times 50% price is increasing. That is also called as what? Hyperinflation. So now this is uncontrollable and it is very, very, very dangerous for the entire economy. Having said that, these are the different types of inflation. And now this is based on speed. Similarly, based on reasons or causes, due to one particular factor, there is a price rise. In that category, there are three types of inflation. One is demand pull inflation, another is cost push inflation, and the third one is built-in inflation. In simple terms, when there is a rise in the demand, when there is a rise in aggregate demand, because of that, what happens? Price rise in inflation happens. It is called as demand pull inflation. Increase in price rise because of excess demand in the economy. That is called as what? Demand pull inflation. What is cost push? Cost push is associated with the suppliers or producers because demand comes from consumers. Cost comes from suppliers. So, cost push inflation means when there is a rise in the price of factors of production like rent, wages, raw materials, labor charges, etc., then automatically what happens? The price of the final price of commodity increases. That is called as cost push inflation or supply sided inflation. And this cost push is of three different categories: wage push inflation, raw material push inflation, and profit push inflation. We'll discuss about these types in detail in the coming videos because there are so many applications also involved in that. Is it clear? I hope the types of inflation based on speed is crystal clear for all of you. To sum up, once again I tell you, creeping is what? Low or mild or manageable inflation. Price rise between 2 to 3%. Chronic is long term. Price rise between 3 to 10 is walking. More than 10 to 20 is running inflation. And more than 20, 300, 400, 500% or up to 1000% per annum, it is calculated yearly. It is called as galloping inflation. And when it is more than 1000%, it becomes uncontrollable. And that is called as hyper or extreme form of inflation. I hope it is crystal clear for all of you. Feel free to put down your feedbacks via the comment box. And this types of inflation in such a chronological order is not available in many sources. So please make sure that you study like this for your easy, thorough understanding. Okay. Thank you and Jai Hind.